Hi, everyone. Super excited to be here today talking about how we can bring participatory design online and how we've done it at Uber. And thank you so much to UXDX for inviting me to speak on this topic today. My name is Kendall Avery. I lead our user experience research team for the rider experience here at Uber. Previously, I worked in the enterprise space for SAP Concur, and I also graduated from the University of Washington's Human-Centered Design and Engineering Department in 2016. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about the problem that our team at Uber faced, the setup for how we conducted this new research method for our team, some of the outcomes that we benefited from using this method, and then finally close with a few reflections that I had on this entire experience. So to set the scene a little bit, ever since Uber came onto the market more than a decade ago, we've been growing and expanding our business into lots of different ways to allow users and people to move all around the world. And then we started expanding into products like food delivery and grocery delivery and really expanding our offerings so that we could be the company that allows users to truly go anywhere and get anything. So as we were growing as a company, we started to realize that there were maybe a little bit of growing pains. So through all of this change, we grew really fast. Our mobility offerings just expanded super quickly. We thought about all the different ways we could allow people to move. And then COVID happened. And so we had to adjust quickly to new lines of business and make sure that we were actually supporting what users needed in that moment when maybe it wasn't necessarily the need to move around and get from A to B. So we saw that we now had a huge number of offerings to support, new use cases than users were maybe familiar with before because just the whole world looks a little bit different. And so our team wanted to know, how can we tell customers the story of what Uber can offer without getting in their way? We know that our users come to us with a purpose, and we were starting to introduce a lot of new things to them, but we wanted to make sure that we were introducing them in a way that didn't interrupt their core intent that brought them to the product. So our teams have been tackling this in a couple of different ways. The first was really focusing on our home screen. This is the first interaction that a lot of people have when they come to our app. And so over the past few years, we've experimented with different ways that we can start highlighting some of these offerings to our users. We used an Uber Eats pill in the top right corner of the screen, moving into a navigation bar at the bottom, and then starting to highlight more of these offerings. But as you can see, we started to run into a bit of an issue where we almost had too much to share with our users, and we were worried that we were running out of space. And so our teams came together, product design and research, to ask a couple of different questions of how could we make sure that we aren't running into an issue of running out of space and not being able to truly tell that full story of what Uber can provide to our users. And so we asked our team a couple of different questions. We wanted to know from the user perspective, how do our customers currently think about all of these different services that Uber offers today? And then since we'd spent so much time looking at our home screen, we also wanted to understand, what does that ideal home screen experience look like for our customers? And so after aligning our product design and research teams around these two questions, the research team, myself and my research partner included, were off to figure out how we could actually tackle these questions. So the first place we started were with methods. What were the right methods that we could bring in to really help us understand both of these core research questions? The first place we started was with interviews. We wondered maybe we could talk to users, have them explain how they use Uber today, how these different products and services actually fit into their day-to-day lives. But this wasn't going to really help us understand the home screen issues that we were trying to understand as well, and how users engage with the home screen today. Then we thought maybe we could do concept evaluations, get some designs from our design team, put them in front of users, and just see how they react. The concern we had with this method was, what if we were designing concepts that didn't actually meet the full range of user needs because we were building them with our assumptions in mind and not necessarily basing them off of user needs that really existed. And so we wanted to make sure that we weren't limited in this approach, since it felt like we were at a really foundational part of this entire process. And so we decided, what if we could actually combine these two together? What if we could allow our users to both show and tell us what their experience means to them and what it actually looks like, and maybe even show us what that ideal home screen experience could really be for them. So we landed on participatory design. And so if you're not familiar, participatory design is a technique that invites the participant to actually be a part of the design process. It invites them to be a creator along with the team and really give them a different way to communicate what matters most to them. Traditionally, this is done in person. It can be in a lot of different forms of media. You can use whiteboard markers, you can use sticky notes, some teams even use Legos. It's really meant to be a creative process that allows users to kind of communicate in a new way and really show us what they mean when they talk about their own experiences. And so this was a super exciting realization for us that we thought this was going to be the right method to use for our project. We thought it was going to really help us understand how do they think about those different services today. We could still interview them and kind of get a little bit of context there. But when it really came down to that home screen design, this was the perfect opportunity for them to show us what meant the most to them. Just a couple issues that we realized we were also going to face with using this method. One, this was brand new to me. I had never run a participatory design study before. This was going to be my very first time running it. And even for my team, this was the first time most of them had ever seen it done too. And so we knew that the first thing we were going to have to do was align on what are the benefits that come from using this method and why was it the right one? Get everybody on board and make sure we all knew what the outputs were going to be from using this method. The second issue that we faced was not only was this going to be the first time that I had ever used a participatory design method before, but given that we were conducting this research in March of 2021 and we were still conducting everything from a work from home environment, this was not just a participatory design study. This was a remote participatory design study. And so this meant that we actually had to figure out not only how to get the team on board and align on how we were going to create these outputs, but figure out what the tool was going to be that we could actually conduct this online. So as I mentioned, we had to bring everyone on board. And the first place to start was aligning on what participatory design is and what it is not. And so participatory design is a method that allows us to understand user needs. It's a great place for users to really show us what they mean and understand what matters most to them. It's a form of visual storytelling. It's a way to give them a different communication tool than they might otherwise have to really show us what they mean. And it's also a way to encourage divergent thinking. This was really important as well. One of the reasons we didn't want to do concept testing was because we didn't know the full range of what concepts could be created. And participatory design is a great place to really explore the full range of creativity and really make sure that whatever our ultimate solution is, it's something that actually works for our users. Now, a little bit about what participatory design is not. It is not final designs. This is one of the first questions that came up. No, we were not asking our users to design the product for us. Instead, we were asking them to inspire us, to help us understand what mattered, what we should consider, and how we can take all of those thoughts, feelings, and emotions about their current experience and bring them into a design that our extremely talented Uber design team was going to bring into fruition. And secondly, it's not rigidly confined. One of the reasons participatory design is such a great method is because it allows for so much creativity. And so we wanted to make sure that our team was fully comfortable with being a little bit uncomfortable and introducing things that maybe we hadn't even considered ourselves, and making sure that we were allowing our users to be as creative as possible throughout this entire process. So now that we had everyone on board, the next thing to do was to figure out how we were going to create the study, and especially in a remote environment, get all of our users to be able to participate. The first place that we started was by collecting all of our materials into Figma. This is the design tool that we use here at Uber, and this is where our designers had already started to kind of think about different components that we could maybe introduce on the home screen. We needed alignment with our product design and research team to say these are the different types of components that we wanted to put in front of users. We wanted a mix of things that already existed today, things that were a little bit new and innovative, and then also things that, we didn't even know how they were going to perform, but this is the right format to introduce it. When we conducted the study, it was also important that we capture a number of different perspectives. And so we actually ran it both in the US and in Mexico City. And so as you can see here, all of our components, once they were brought into Figma, were also localized and translated so that our Mexico City participants were seeing them in their actual context. And the ultimate home screen designs that they came up with were things that truly looked familiar to them. And so first place, we got everything together in Figma, and then we had to figure out how to take this traditional method of, pen and paper, sticky notes, glue sticks, tape, all of that, and bring it online. And so what we needed there was the right tool to allow us to do it. And when we were thinking about what was important, we knew that we needed a tool that was going to be collaborative, shareable, and easy to navigate. And I'll touch on the importance of each of these. So first, for collaborative, we knew that it had to be something that our users were actually able to truly be a participant in. It wasn't going to be valuable if it was just them telling us what they needed and us moving things around for them. We really needed to make sure that they were actually in control of the entire experience. And so we took a look at some remote whiteboarding solutions, tools like Mural, and FigJam, plenty of others that are also on the market. For us, we ended up using Mural. This is a tool that the research team was already using for some of our synthesis efforts, and so it was a familiar tool for us. But take a look at what your company already uses or tools that you're familiar with if you're thinking about running your own remote participatory design study. And so now we knew that we had a collaborative tool that was going to allow multiple people to engage with the product at the same time. And that way we could make sure that it wasn't just a one-sided effort, that our participants in the study were truly going to be invited to co-create with us. The next important thing was that the tool was shareable. We had to make sure that our participants were actually going to be able to join the canvas that we had created for them to conduct the study. And we wanted to reduce the barrier to entry by making sure that it wasn't something that they needed to create an account for. And so with Mural, one of the ways that we did this was by using their visitor links. This is something that we could also bring a little bit of governance around so that we could either password protect the links and make sure that any confidential information wasn't shared beyond the bounds of the study. And we could also remove access as soon as the study was completed. And so this way we knew that people didn't actually have to create an account. It was going to be super easy for them to join the session and sign up. And we could also make sure that we were protecting any proprietary information that was only meant to be seen within the study. And finally, the last piece I touched on was easy to navigate. And this was important because as technology professionals, we are using technology every single day. And so what I find easy to navigate isn't necessarily going to be easy for somebody else. And one of the things that we'd also learned through our remote research was that we had users of various levels of technical abilities. We wanted to make sure that we weren't limiting access to their insights by saying that somebody wasn't actually able to engage with this tool. And so we did this by actually starting off with a practice exercise. We created a practice exercise at the beginning of every single study, and we encouraged our participants to really get comfortable using this tool by dragging and dropping these icons over to this iPhone screen frame and basically show and tell us what their current home screen looks like for them. Now, this wasn't something that we were actually capturing data on. It wasn't, truly part of the study, but it was super important for a number of reasons. One, this got them comfortable with the tool, with the dragging and dropping functionality. This was going to be core for the rest of the entire experience. And so this was our chance to get any bugs figured out, any troubleshooting tips, make sure that people were really comfortable with the mechanisms of Mural before we actually dove into the meat of the study and really where we wanted to gather the most insights. Secondly, this was super important because it also allowed us to practice the Think Aloud protocol and get users comfortable with the amount of information and detail that we were going to want them to share for us during the study. So even though this was a practice exercise and we weren't actually capturing data from it, we treated it as if it was part of the study. We would ask probing questions. We would follow up and ask users to share their rationale with us and just make sure that they were comfortable talking through the decisions that they were making, so that by the time we actually moved over to the main exercise, they already kind of knew what was expected of them, and we could just jump straight in to immediate value for both the participant and the rest of the team. And so we had our components in Figma, we had our practice exercise set up, and then finally we brought it all together into our canvas that we used for actually conducting the study. And so this is where, after completing that practice exercise, we brought our participants over and essentially turned them loose to create their own home screen design. We made sure to bring in a variety of components that, again, all aligned on between our design and product teams. And then even to encourage some of that creativity, brought in some create your own components that made sure that users understood that if there was something that they needed that they didn't see here today, it was still encouraged that they brought it into part of their designs. And so we conducted this study with 19 participants across the US and Mexico City. And at the end of it, we ended up having 19 plus home screen designs. And so the benefit we also found with using this remote method was that after every single study was completed, we now had this artifact of what their home screen design looked like. And we could bring them all together and actually synthesize our study results visually. And this was also a new method, I guess, for us. Traditionally, we would maybe code our interviews and rewatch video clips. And while we still had all of that because our sessions were conducted via Zoom, this allowed us another way to quickly synthesize and see any patterns across all of the designs that our users had created. So we were able to bring in all of the different designs, all of the different things also that were not included on the designs themselves. That was a super important piece as well. Not only did we want to know what was included, but what was the rationale for things that were not included. And so we brought them all together and were able to quickly see themes and patterns emerging. And then even using Mural's comment feature to leave comments directly on some of the components and bring in direct quotes from our users to help explain the rationale for their design decisions. This was super beneficial for our research team, but also for our partner teams. This is something that we actually shared out while the synthesis was ongoing. And it was just another way that we could encourage our team to be immersed in the insights as they were happening and not feel like there was this big delay between the research being completed and the report being shared out. This was a way to incorporate everybody into the entire process and make sure that they were capturing the insights basically at the same time that we were. And then finally, some of the outputs from our designs. This is the type of artifact that each user created. And it was really helpful for us, again, to see that mental model kind of come to life, see what mattered to them, understand why, really challenge some of our own assumptions around what we thought mattered to users. And we even asked some of our participants to take a look at the screen that they designed and take a look at their app today. And we saw that some people were even designing, the experience that they already had because that mental model was so strong, and the way that they use our products today really drove how they created that home screen design. And so it was super helpful for us to have this visual representation of what mattered to our users and a really concrete way for us to make sure that we were actually designing products that met their needs and not just based off of our assumptions. So the study is complete. We have all of these different artifacts. We're doing the synthesis and we get these really great insights. What does this actually mean for our team? So for Uber, this meant we actually changed our strategy. The outputs from this research really informed, challenged a lot of the assumptions that we had and took us in a new direction. It even led us to put a pause on some of our engineering efforts because we wanted to make sure that we were building the right thing and not maybe following our assumptions from before. So it was really valuable that we did this research at this point in time. The next is that it led us to fast follow research. We were immediately able to pivot to new research questions that came out of this round of research. So we quickly turned our focus to say, okay, we've learned all this new information. What are the new unknowns and how can we go out and tackle those? And then through some of that fast follow research, we were also a little bit more open to trying new things. We actually experimented with different research methods like a 5-second study or unmoderated card sorting, things that were still a little bit unfamiliar to our team, but there was a little bit more comfort now that we had tried a method that was new to all of us, and it really paid off. And so in our fast follow research, we were able to be a little bit more open and creative and make sure that we were doing whatever it took to get the insights that we needed to make confident product decisions moving forward. And so the project on the whole was a success for the research team, for Uber, and what did this mean going forward? What were some of the reflections and takeaways that I had from this project? Well, the first was, this was a remote study because it had to be, because we were in a work from home environment and there wasn't even the possibility to do this in person. But it also got us wondering, is remote still a viable option for future research studies when we want to use participatory design? And some of the things that we considered were that absolutely. One of the great benefits we got from using this method was we really had global reach for our users. We actually talked to people in rural areas and urban areas, folks that maybe had we done this in person, we wouldn't have gotten the same variety of responses from our participants because we have offices in metropolitan locations. You tend to recruit people that live locally to those areas. So we ended up actually getting a more diverse group of participants by doing this study remotely. Secondly, as I mentioned, our synthesis was all contained in the tool. That was super helpful for expediting the synthesis process altogether. But had we done this in person, we might have added a little bit of overhead in trying to figure out how do we take pictures of all of the different artifacts? Where do we store them? How are we actually going to conduct synthesis on all of these different physical materials? And so having them all consolidated into the same place just sped the process up a little bit. And then finally, because it was done remotely and over Zoom, it was actually really easy for our partner teams to observe the interviews and participatory design while it was happening. This is something that's really important for us on our research team. We always encourage our partner teams to attend research sessions whenever possible. And so this was a great way to make sure that the participant felt comfortable while they were designing and didn't feel like they had a bunch of eyes on them, but still allowed our partner teams to observe quietly in the background and get the insights in real time. Now, not to say that remote participatory design is always the way it should be. There are plenty of reasons not to do it remotely. For example, technical limitations definitely came into play. We had some participants who, despite the practice exercise and all of the information we gave them up front about how to join the session, still had some technical issues, either interacting with the participatory design itself, or even just getting access to the tool. We had some participants who their laptops were down, they had to join on a mobile device, and the study just wasn't going to be run the same way. So we had to adapt on the fly and make sure that we were still able to get value out of these sessions, but technical limitations were definitely in the mix. And it's something to consider if your core audience that you're testing with has technical limitations to begin with, then you might not want to do a remote version of this method. Secondly, because it's remote, the creative mediums that you're actually able to have your participants engage with can feel a little bit limiting. As I mentioned, we did everything with Figma. We chose to go high fidelity. You can go range of fidelities and even use wireframes, but you still end up being kind of limited to these 2D mediums to interact with. And so if you really want to encourage a lot of creativity and a lot of divergent thinking beyond, the digital bounds, then you might not want to do a remote study, and you might want to actually opt for something that's a little bit more physical or in person and creative, like Legos or pom-poms or who knows what it could be. And then finally, we did have to limit the number of exercises that we actually conducted with our participants. We had ideas of all these different ways that we could actually ask them to, show us different mental models, and we had to scale it back because we know that Zoom fatigue is real. We didn't want participants getting tired after spending too much time on a study, talking to a computer, and so we actually had to limit the number of exercises we introduced to them. And so if you're thinking about your own research needs and there's a lot that you want to cover, that's another thing to consider and why you might choose an in-person version of participatory design. Now, a couple tips for success for this study. Number one, allow for creativity. A participatory design is most successful when everybody feels empowered to be their most creative selves. And so really think about, does your study really merit this full range of creativity, and really how far can you push the bounds of that? The more that you, your team, and your participants know that this is highly, highly encouraged, the better results that you're going to get. Second, be flexible. Especially in a remote environment, things are going to go wrong. And so think about all the different ways you can troubleshoot in advance, make sure that you're super comfortable with the tools that you're using, but also if things go wrong, that's okay. Like I mentioned, we had a couple of participants who actually weren't able to fully engage with the study the way that we had hoped they would. We adjusted. We turned it into more of an interview instead, or I would drag and drop the items for them and ask clarifying questions. But we really tried to get as much out of it as we possibly could. And I think that's the most important thing when you're conducting research with users anyways, is make sure that you're finding whatever valuable information you can when you're speaking with them. The time is so valuable and it can be so limited that even if you get one interesting insight, I think it's still worth it. Finally, pilot test. This is so important. Pilot testing is critical to running this type of research, especially since there's so many moving parts. You've got your collaborative tool, you've got technical limitations of the users that you're working with. I always make sure that I'm pilot testing with somebody who's completely unfamiliar with the product. That way, I'm also understanding if my questions make sense for them, if there's anything that I haven't considered or I've missed because I'm a little bit too close to the product. And so make sure that you're actually practicing this before you get in front of users. That can help make sure you know all the troubleshooting steps to help them. And then also possibly, expand the bounds of what your test you thought was capable of in the first place. And finally, a checklist for success. Number one, determine your research questions. Make sure that the research questions that you have are going to be well suited with a participatory design method. Not every single research question is well suited for participatory design. It's definitely not a one-size-fits-all method, but make sure that this is something where you really feel like you're going to get benefit from having your participants both show and tell you what that mental model looks like for them. Secondly, gather those materials and stimuli. Make sure that you have all the different things that you're going to ask your participants to actually create with and have them all together and get alignment with your product and design teams to make sure that everyone agrees that this is what's going to be tested. Next, select that remote collaboration tool. Find something that you're familiar with, play around with a couple, figure out the one that you think is going to work best for you and your team's needs, and then set up that practice exercise. Make sure that it's something that maybe fits within the realm of the study, but is something that's going to allow you to practice the troubleshooting and get participants comfortable with that Think Aloud protocol at the beginning of the study. Next, set everything together with your Canvas, pilot test, and then finally launch and iterate the study as needed. And so thank you so much for your time today. I hope you feel inspired and possibly interested in trying out remote participatory design with your teams. Thank you again to UXDX for having me, and check us out at Uber. We are hiring. Thanks again.